This is my IBM personal computer XT. The goal of this video is to give you a high-level overview of the machine, both on the outside as well as on the inside. I'll also cover the various components which are in the machine, as well as the state of the machine when I got it. I'll share with you some of the issues I encountered and how I fixed them in order to get the machine up and running again. There will be some follow-up videos that go into more detail on every component, a couple of hardware upgrades and downgrades planned, and some other interesting stuff. Despite the fact that this is marketed as an IBM Personal Computer XT, this is much more of an AT-based system. It features a 5¼ inch 1.2 megabyte disk drive, a 1.44 megabyte 3.5 inch disk drive, a 20 megabyte MFM hard drive, and a front panel that doesn't really fit. By looking at the case, we can see that it needs a lot of TLC. Despite the fact that this is marketed as an XT machine, this is much more of an AT-based system. Just look at this 5 16-bit ISO slots on the motherboard. It features an Intel 286 processor running at 6 MHz with an optional math coprocessor, something you'll only find on an AT system. The motherboard also features 640 kilobytes of RAM, 128 of which is soldered right onto the board, just below the power connector. The other 512 kilobytes is offered by two SIM modules, just below the onboard memory. The main board also comes with two BIOS chips, two 8-bit chips that offer a combined 16-bit to the data bus. They're marked low and high. The IBM 5162 was introduced 2 years after the first IBM AT machine, the 5170. Despite the fact that it was faster under certain circumstances due to the zero-weight state memory, it failed to convince customers due to the lack of compatibility with older systems like the IBM 5150 and 5160. Expansion cards could no longer be used due to the fact that the 5162 case was actually shorter. As a result, it had a much shorter lifespan than the other IBM PCs from that era. Moving to the back of the system, we can see that a huge part is being taken up by the power supply, with an output to drive a monitor and an input for the actual power. The power supply also comes with the iconic IBM power switch. We have the power supply fan. We also have a battery compartment for a 6-volt lithium battery to store CMOS settings. We have a standard AT keyboard connector and room for the various expansion slots. In this particular system, we have a VGA card, serial parallel port, and the actual hard drive and floppy drive controller. To get inside the case, all we need to do is unscrew these 5 screws here located at the back of the computer. So let's quickly do that. With the screws removed, all that's left to do now is slide open the case cover so that we can access the internals of the system. At the back of the case we have this compartment with a battery icon on it. Now, as this IBM PC has a BIOS chip included, it needs to have some way to save the BIOS settings, so it uses a battery for that. Now, from the factory, IBM supports 6-volt lithium batteries that can be held into this compartment. Now, mine didn't come with the original battery anymore, but you can find these 6-volt lithium batteries still in stores today. The compartment features a 4-pin connection header that mounts directly onto the motherboard. The 4-pin header to connect the battery compartment can be found next to the keyboard connector on the motherboard. My system came with an aftermarket solution using AA batteries. A battery compartment holder was used to connect to the motherboard. Unfortunately, the batteries were heavily corroded and could no longer be used, so we needed to look for a different solution. To solve the battery issue, I used a battery box holder case for 4 AA batteries, providing the required 6 volts. I'm using DuPont headers and housings to connect the two wires from the battery box onto the motherboard. The DuPont headers are standard female headers. Using a crimping tool, we can attach the wires from the battery box onto the DuPont headers. With the wires connected to the DuPont headers, all that's left to do is store them into the housing so that we can make a clean connection onto the motherboard. Back inside the case, we start with the big power supply, which is located on the top right, which takes up a large chunk of the enclosure. Below that we have the MFM hard drive, 20 megabytes, still fully functioning. Next to that we have the 5¼ inch 1.2 meg floppy drive. A 1.4 megabyte floppy drive will be installed later on. We have the battery compartment and the 3 expansion cards on the left, with a big one, the I/O card, a serial parallel port, and a VGA card. Let's take a closer look at the various expansion cards which are installed in this system. So let me start by unscrewing all the screws that hold the expansion cards in place, and we'll take a closer look. We'll start by looking at the graphics card, which is a 16-bit ISA VGA card, which is very convenient as it allowed me to hook up a standard VGA monitor on it. It has a Paradise 88 PVGA chip on it. I think it has half a megabyte or 256 kilobytes of RAM. And it also has a couple of dip switches which allows us to set the various modes or allow it to coexist with another card. I'm going to try out different video options for this PC, including MFA, CGA, and EGA once I get the appropriate monitors for it. Next up we have a small 8-bit ISA card which holds the serial and the parallel port. This would have been a fairly common card back in the day, as a lot of peripherals used either the parallel or the serial port. This will probably come in handy later when we want to transfer files from and to this PC. As you can see, the user had written the addresses of the parallel and the serial port onto this chip. And the final card we're going to take a look at is the I/O controller card, which is used to hook up not only the hard drive but also the floppy drive. It is the biggest card into the system, and it takes up almost the entire space of the IBM case. Now note that in the original XT IBM personal computers, the expansion cards were actually a lot bigger because the case was also bigger. So this is actually already a tight fit and was created specifically for this IBM XT 5162. It has the various connectors. It can hook up a hard drive and a floppy drive. It's created in 1985 according to this PGA chip. It doesn't have any external connectors on the card. I actually bought this system from a really nice guy who told me that it was given to him as a gift from his grandfather. His grandfather worked for a government agency responsible for writing out pensions. So I can only imagine that the computer was used to do all kinds of number crunching tasks, writing documents or creating spreadsheets, printing out reports. But as time passed by, the PC itself was put into retirement, given to the grandson, allowing him to use it for school and, more importantly, play MS-DOS games. Unfortunately, it's in a condition where it doesn't boot. It has a disk drive missing, a missing front panel, no BIOS settings were saved, and it had a corroded battery. Although I was able to hit F1 to resume the system actually loaded into IBM PC Basic. Now the PC will do that when it doesn't find any bootable media. In my particular case, it doesn't find the hard drive, and it has a problem finding one of the disk drives. The only disk drive that it does have is the 5¼ inch floppy drive, for which I don't have any floppies. So I don't have any means of configuring the PC using an IBM setup disk. So for the moment, I'm stuck with this IBM PC Basic. Now, as the name implies, IBM PC Basic uses a basic programming language to enter commands into this user interface. As such, it allows the operator to configure the PC using basic commands. Now, as you can see, the commands are fairly low level, difficult to remember, and very cumbersome to work with.
Well, there's this application which is called GSetup Basic, which is a Windows application that you can start. And it provides you with a graphical user interface to configure your entire PC. So first thing we need to do is we need to select our BIOS, which is the IBM 5162. There's only one BIOS revision for this particular PC. I can configure the amount of base memory my system has, in this case the 640 kilobytes. I don't have any expansion memory. I'm already going to define a 1.44 megabyte drive as a primary disk drive because I'm going to be installing this. And I'm going to be using the 1.2 megabyte as the secondary disk drive. I've also looked up the hard drive type, which is installed in the system, and it's hard drive type number 2. And finally, I'm going to be setting the display type and the fact that there is no coprocessor installed. Now, keep in mind that if any of these settings are incorrect and the IBM PC is able to detect that error, that it will also prompt you with an error. However, as soon as it finds a bootable media, whether it's a floppy drive or a hard drive, it will allow you to resume operations and boot into that media. So I'm going to click Generate, and what this does is generate a bunch of text that you can drop into a file or print out, which contains all of these commands that you need to type into your IBM PC Basic. So as you can see, there are lots of commands that you need to do. So let's get started.
Remember that gaping hole on top of the existing disk drive? Well, for my convenience, I'm going to install a 1.44 megabyte 3.5-inch floppy drive. So as we've already configured a 1.44 megabyte disk drive in the BIOS setup program just moments ago, I'm going to hook this up and branch off the existing floppy cable, add power to it, and we should be good to go.
So I've printed out all the commands which are needed for setting up this PC using IBM PC Basic, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing now. So I'm going to be keying in all of these commands manually into the IBM PC just by copying this text line by line. So wish me luck. There are lots of commands to get through, so let's kick this off.
Okay, so we just finished typing our last command. I'm going to be shutting down the machine right now, restarting it, and seeing if it picked up the new settings and removed all of the error messages. So time to flip the switch. So we're starting with the memory test, 64 kilobytes of conventional memory. We're hearing the 1.44 meg floppy drive, the 5.25-inch floppy drive, and the hard drive. So it's looking for a bootable medium right now. And it's booting from the hard drive. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and with the machine kind of set up now, it's time for some light gaming and think about what else we're going to do with this PC. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more retro or IBM related content. Bye for now.